And the Maywood Village Board has voted to make Fred Hampton's childhood home a historic landmark. He was the chairman of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
There's a new twist in the O.J. Simpson case. Los Angeles police are investigating the discovery of a knife reportedly found on the property that Simpson once owned.
CBS's Terry Okita reports this comes more than 20 years after the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman.
You ever seen mansions once filled with light, music, and laughter turn into crumbling, cold, and eerie ruins? The image of these abandoned homes isn't just a forgotten pile of wealth. It's a living testament to downfall, etched with the marks of tragedies no one saw coming. Behind every rotting wall is a name that once shook the world: artists, rappers, actors, black legends. These multi-million-dollar homes, once symbols of the American dream, now stand with cracked walls, broken doors, piled-up trash, and rumors no one dares verify. Why did those who stood at the pinnacle of glory, rich, powerful, adored by millions, end their lives in abject pain, leaving behind a frigid house covered in dust and mold? In this video, we'll dive into 25 mansions once owned by the most famous black stars in the world. You won't believe who lived here, and you'll be even more shocked to learn how their lives ended. 1. Donnie Hathaway, musical genius, dead in loneliness and paranoia. At 33, Donnie Hathaway was once hailed as the soul of American soul music. From a kid playing the organ in church to a star with a voice that silenced the world, he crafted timeless love songs like A Song for You, Where is the Love, and The Ghetto. He was a genius, a phenomenon, a man who turned the deepest pain into the most beautiful music. But behind that spotlight lies an ending no one dares mention. In 1972, he moved into a 3-story home at 4443 South Dorchester Avenue, Hyde Park. It was a dream, a classic red brick house, 3,800 square feet, a gift to himself, his wife Eulalia, and their 2 young daughters. A peaceful haven with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small recording studio, an oak tree in the yard, and warm, soul-infused interiors. The ground floor studio, soundproofed, was packed with instruments and tapes. But within a few years, it became a maze of paranoia and darkness. Donnie started hearing voices in his head, whispers in the night. They didn't stop. They spoke all day. He believed the CIA bugged his piano strings, that everyone was watching him. He tore up sheet music, smashed instruments, locked the studio door. Every night, he taped maps to the walls, scrawling in red ink. They're here. Bipolar disorder took complete control. Relentless paranoia, violent outbursts, chronic insomnia. His wife couldn't endure the suffocating life and left in 1974. The kids drifted away. The house, once alive with laughter, turned as cold as an asylum with no nurses. From then on, he lived alone. No light, no warmth, nothing but pills and the echoes in his mind. Finances dried up. Recording gear was sold off for sedatives and liquor. Royalties from old hits trickled in, but not enough to save the crumbling house. In December 1978, a pipe burst, flooding the kitchen. He ignored it, locked the door, started sleeping on a velvet chair in the studio, the creative heart of the home now just a hum of a fan and bone-chilling cold. On January 13, 1979, Donnie was in New York for a new recording project that could have sparked a comeback. But that night, he fell from the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel. No one knows what went through his mind in that final moment. No one could stop him. Eulalia had to borrow money for the funeral. The label refused to help. The Hyde Park house was abandoned that day. No one wanted to return. The family listed it for sale in 1980, but no one dared buy it. In 1983, a young couple considered turning it into a music studio, but backed out after finding chilling, scribbled notes plastered in the studio. In 1993, a young producer tried reviving the studio. 3 weeks later, he survived a car crash, but lost his short-term memory. The project died forever. Today, the house still stands, a ghostly structure in Hyde Park. The old oak is hollow, the roof is missing tiles, the studio is draped in cobwebs. By 2002, it was labeled a hazardous property. The oak tree snapped, crashing into the studio wall, the very room where Hathaway wrote his final song. 2. O.J. Simpson, How the Rockingham Mansion Swallowed a Legend. Whole O.J. Simpson was once an untouchable icon, the first NFL star to rush over 2,000 yards in a season, a box office actor, the million-dollar face of every major ad campaign. Americans loved him, admired him, believed nothing could tarnish the juice, but then he bought a mansion, and every brick in it slowly turned his life into an inescapable tragedy. In 1988, he moved into 360 North Rockingham Avenue, a Mediterranean-style villa in the heart of wealthy Brentwood. 6,200 square feet of opulence, a marble-tiled pool, tennis court, private gym, and $900,000 worth of custom European furnishings. It wasn't just a home, it was O.J. Simpson's power statement, but power didn't bring peace. When Nicole Brown moved in with their 2 young kids in 1990, the house transformed. Lavish parties faded, replaced by control. O.J. installed cameras, tapped phones, scrutinized bills, not out of concern, but obsession. Nicole left 2 years later, abandoning the mansion to O.J. and leaving him alone with a growing sense of isolation. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole was murdered at her Bundy Drive condo, just a 5-minute drive from Simpson's mansion. Simpson became a suspect, but instead of calmly explaining, he led a 2-hour chase in his white Bronco, gun in hand. The ordeal aired live to over 95 million viewers. When he returned to Rockingham, the mansion was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, surrounded by police, the biggest snare of his life. In the trial of the century in 1995, Simpson was acquitted, but no one called him a legend anymore. After the trial, his life plummeted. No fame, no fortune, no place that would accept him. The mansion was besieged by reporters, threatening calls, hate mail, pig's blood dumped in the pool. He wandered the house like a ghost, rewatching old game tapes and sobbing. A legend destroyed himself in the fortress he built. In 1998, the bank foreclosed on the mansion. Hundreds gathered to watch it be demolished. Walls fell, floors shattered, glory buried in rubble. He moved to a rented home in Florida and died quietly in 2024 from cancer. The Rockingham mansion, once his peak, is now a barren lot, untouched by anyone. But people still remember, not because Simpson was a legend, but because it's the black hole of fame, where glory was devoured by violence, suspicion, and unshakable obsessions. 3. Billie Holiday, the voice of a genius, fell silent in the shadows of an Upper West Side apartment. Billie Holiday, Lady Day, wasn't just a legendary voice, but an emblem of a life steeped in unspoken tragedy. From Carnegie Hall's stage, she captivated audiences with timeless songs. But beneath that glamour, a pained Billie was sinking into self-destruction. The Upper West Side apartment she moved into in the winter of 1952 wasn't a place for safety. It was a hideout from the world, from herself. When she settled into the 2,500 square foot apartment with 3 bedrooms and a luxurious living room overlooking Manhattan, people thought Billie had found peace to keep creating. With dark wood floors, a marble fireplace, and crystal chandeliers, the space bore the mark of a talented, proud woman. But in reality, it wasn't a star's haven. It was where she hid from lonely nights, drowning in addiction she couldn't escape. On nights off stage, Billie sat alone, clutching a glass of gin, staring at the people below through the window. Not indifference, but a sadness she couldn't suppress. A life paralyzed by liquor and heroin. By 1954, midnight screams weren't unfamiliar to neighbors. When police arrived, they found Billie in the living room, lips bloodied, eyes bruised. Her abusive lover, Louis McKay, was wrecking everything, including her precious records. Still, the cops just shook their heads and left, knowing Billie would never press charges. She performed at Birdland a week later, lips still swollen, her voice laden with pain, but still mesmerizing. No one could have guessed her glory days would end so soon. That enchanting voice was no longer celebrated. Banned from performing due to drug convictions, her income plummeted, and the Upper West Side apartment, once a symbol of success, became a haze of cigarette smoke, scattered liquor bottles, and unpaid bills. In 1957, she was arrested for the 4th time for drug possession, her lover gone with her savings. A suspended sentence haunted her, and the name Billie Holiday became synonymous with failure, a disaster waiting to die. Months later, she collapsed in the bathtub, her addicted body too frail to stand. The apartment was now a shadow of its past, its valuables sold for drugs and hospital bills. On July 17, 1959, Billie died at Metropolitan Hospital, her hands still cuffed to the bed. She had 70 cents to her name and no one by her side. The Upper West Side apartment was auctioned off 3 weeks later, leaving only a space of memories. Everything in the apartment was erased. No velvet chairs, no Persian rugs, no microphone, no songs. Just a silent home. And sometimes, under the dim streetlights, music lovers pause outside, listening. They can still feel a voice rising from the past. Them that's got shall get. A voice that couldn't save itself. 4. Fred Hampton, betrayed in his own home. Fred Hampton, one of the youngest leaders of the Black Panther movement, wasn't just a revolutionary. At 21, he was a model of wisdom, strength, and passion. With his oratory and sharp political vision, Hampton built a coalition among poor communities, a genuine threat to America's political system at the time. He was a fire that led, a man who ignited hope for society's outcasts. The ground floor apartment on Monroe Street, West Side Chicago, was where Fred Hampton fought. From the outside, the modest apartment was unremarkable. A plain door, dusty windows. But inside, it was where strategies were drawn, where silent revolutions were planned. It was where a man with a voice like thunder built an empire that even the FBI feared. In that small room, with an old wooden table and Black Panther posters, Fred and his comrades devised plans not just to fight oppression, but to build a future for the poor. A life full of hope bloomed here, where single mothers and uneducated students found help, even a refuge in a cold society. But darkness came swiftly. A traitor was planted. William O'Neill, an infiltrator who handed the FBI detailed layouts of the apartment. On that fateful day, Fred returned home on the night of December 3, 1969. He hugged Deborah Johnson, his pregnant girlfriend, kissed her softly, and said he'd start a political class for kids the next morning. He didn't know the orange juice O'Neill gave him was laced with secobarbital, a powerful sedative, enough to send him into eternal sleep. At dawn on December 4th, as Fred and Deborah slept, police stormed the apartment. 14 officers, 99 bullets. The wooden floor was torn apart. Blood-stained posters, pamphlets, even the typewriter. Fred, lying in bed, was shot 3 times in cold blood. One officer leaned down, looked at him, and said, "He's good and dead now." The horrific scene was soon buried in darkness. The apartment was no longer a place of resistance. It became a crime scene. Fred's loved ones cleaned up, collecting blood-soaked papers and torn photos. They didn't mop the floor, wanting the bloodstains to be seen, so no one would forget Fred Hampton. But their adversaries wouldn't allow it. The apartment was abandoned as the Hampton family was forced to leave, leaving only traces of blood and betrayal. When the building was converted into condos in 1982, Hampton's apartment was split in 2. New walls erected. Abstract art hung where blood once stained. No memorial plaque. No mention of Fred Hampton in the property records. But sometimes neighbors say in the late afternoons, older black men stand at the door, bowing their heads in silence as if they can still hear Fred's voice in the air. 5. Jimi Hendrix, the final tragedy in the Purple Room that haunts London. Jimi Hendrix wasn't an ordinary artist. He was a phenomenon. A guitar storm that swept Woodstock, the scream of purple haze, flames licking his Fender Stratocaster on stage. In just 4 years, he did what decades couldn't. Shattered sound barriers, broke every mold, became an immortal icon. But what lay behind the spotlight? A lonely Hendrix, lost, adrift in the music he created. Summer 1970, London was muggy and quiet. Hendrix lived at 23 Brook Street, Mayfair, a 2-bedroom apartment with deep purple walls, red velvet curtains drooping like dried blood, and a worn Persian rug. A small studio sat nearby, holding guitars, a Marshall amp, and stacks of unfinished drafts. It wasn't a home. It was a dark, chaotic world, half real, half dream, where a genius was slowly unraveling. Back from the Isle of Wight festival, Hendrix was exhausted. He barely ate, barely slept, his face gaunt, eyes vacant. His left hand, the one that spun cosmic melodies, trembled from drugs, alcohol, and endless sleepless nights. Every morning, he woke to suffocating calls from his manager, Mike Jeffrey, rumored to have pocketed hundreds of thousands from tour earnings. The band was fracturing. The media turned away. Hendrix slid into a bottomless pit with no one to pull him back. On the night of September 16th, his girlfriend Monica Danneman brought Hendrix back to Brook Street after a lackluster gig. He sprawled on the bed, groping for a bottle, then swallowed a few Vesperax sleeping pills. It was the last time he was seen conscious. On the morning of September 18th, Monica found Jimmy motionless, foam at his mouth, eyes wide as if staring at the purple ceiling. His death was confirmed at 11:45 a.m. Overdose of sleeping pills and alcohol, stomach full of undigested vomit. After his death, questions swirled. Suicide? Accident? Or did someone want Hendrix silenced forever? Mike Jeffrey died in a plane crash 3 years later, taking countless secrets with him. The Brook Street apartment was sealed for 3 weeks. Police tore through it. Rumors said they ripped out bedroom walls after finding strange bloodstains. But then, silence. No charges. No clear answers. From 1971 to 2015, the apartment changed hands dozens of times. It sat abandoned for over a decade. Curtains rotted, the ceiling leaked, the Persian rug was rolled up and tossed in storage. Locals called it the Purple Room. No one stayed long, not because of ghosts, but because of the eerie silence lurking within. In 2016, the apartment was restored as a museum. Walls were repainted the original purple, red curtains rewoven from old photos, the studio recreated from Hendrix's sketches. But no one could recover his final recordings. No one could hear that guitar again. Visitors stand by the window where Hendrix once gazed onto Brook Street for inspiration. Everyone's trying to hear something that's gone. 6. Jean-Michel Basquiat, a prodigy crushed by addiction and a quiet death in NoHo. Jean-Michel Basquiat was a blazing icon of contemporary art. From a black kid scrawling graffiti on New York's grimy walls, he rose to become one of the most influential artists of the 80s. His raw, primal paintings, blending street culture with primal art, stunned the art world. He collaborated with Andy Warhol, became an international sensation, but behind the spotlight was a life with no escape. In 1988, Jean-Michel Basquiat lived in a 3,000-square-foot loft in NoHo, the heart of Manhattan's rebel art scene. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a massive studio. The industrial space was cold, rough concrete walls, dark wood floors, heavy steel tables, stark black leather chairs. Basquiat's paintings hung everywhere, walls, floors, even the bathroom. The floor was littered with sketches, used needles, spilled paint cans. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a fever dream called art. The more famous he became, the deeper Basquiat sank into heroin. Endless white nights, liquor, drugs, and blaring music threatened to burst the loft's walls. His relationship with Andy Warhol fractured after quiet disputes. Basquiat spiraled into depression after Warhol's sudden death in early 1987. From then on, the loft became a cage. No more guests, no more laughter. Just the sound of a brush scratching canvas like cuts on skin. On the morning of August 12, 1988, the loft was silent. Basquiat lay slumped in his studio. One final heroin hit, heavy, dirty, misdosed. He died in an overdose no one expected, at 27, still clutching a bottle, his last painting unfinished. When paramedics arrived, the air still reeked of paint and opium. After his death, the NoHo loft became one of the art world's brutal memories. The new owner erased every trace of Basquiat. They renovated, turned the studio into a living room, and demolished most of the artist's remnants. From a place of boundless creation, the loft became a sterile space, filled with pricey furniture, but void of soul. Yet, even in its transformation, the concrete walls and wood floors held Basquiat's shadow. Visitors say there's a faint sense of his spirit, dim but ever present. In 1989, the loft was sold. The art world moved on, but Basquiat's memory, a young genius who rose from poverty and racism only to fall to the monsters of life and fame, still haunts. 7. Eazy-E, from the heights of fame to a haunting death in a Calabasas mansion. Eazy-E, the uncrowned king of gangsta rap, laid the first brick for the music empire called NWA. He was the voice of the streets, of rebellion, of a forgotten generation. Not just a rapper, he was a businessman, a producer, a man who turned poverty, violence, and drugs into artistic weapons. Leaving Compton, he didn't just carry a dream of a better life, he brought a hurricane called hip-hop. He settled in Calabasas in a 5,000-square-foot mansion with 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a pool, and a custom-built studio for creating, partying, and dominating the music industry. But that was just the surface. Inside the 90s-style mansion, with plush white leather furniture, blazing red neon lights, glass walls overlooking manicured lawns, was a world rotting day by day. Feuds with NWA members, unresolved legal battles, media pressure, fractured relationships, all weighed on the man who embodied street power. Then, in 1995, a shock hit like lightning. Eazy-E was diagnosed with HIV, rapidly progressing to AIDS. Within weeks, his body collapsed. Wasted, gaunt, no trace of his defiant swagger. He lay in the West Wing bedroom, once a warm hub for friends, partners, and endless parties, now an invisible iron cage where he withered second by second. Neon lights still glowed, AC hummed, but there was no music, no laughter, just labored breaths, panic, and a vacant stare through the vast glass window where the day's last sunlight couldn't warm a weary soul. On March 26, 1995, Eazy-E died at 30 in silence. The mansion, once a symbol of the American dream, became an unnamed tomb for a legend. It turned frigid. In the nights that followed, only the wind howled through the halls, water dripped from an old shower, and the faint echo of a fallen empire lingered. A year later, the bank foreclosed on the mansion. It was auctioned off, renovated. The pool was demolished. White leather chairs, neon lights, speakers that once blasted NWA, all torn out, discarded. New owners moved in, erasing every trace, not even a photo left to remember. But no matter how many times the mansion changed, whispers called it cursed. 8. Nipsey Hussle, an icon, gunned down. Near his dream home, Nipsey Hussle was synonymous with the hustle spirit of Crenshaw, a rapper, entrepreneur, community activist, Grammy nominee, and icon for young black Angelenos. He didn't just make music, he rebuilt a neighborhood, created jobs, sparked hope. From nothing, he climbed to fame with his voice. But behind the spotlight was a tragedy too brutal. Nipsey lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Baldwin Hills, LA's affluent enclave, far from the poor streets of his youth. The 4,200-square-foot mansion had 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a palm-lined garden. Inside was a world of art and ambition. Cold gray leather furniture, glossy marble tables, graffiti art covering walls, and a cutting-edge studio where he crafted every track. The house was where he lived, worked, and dreamed of turning Crenshaw into an economic empire for young black people. But on March 31, 2019, it all crumbled. Nipsey was shot 10 times outside his Marathon clothing store, just blocks from the mansion. The killer, Eric Holder, was an acquaintance with an unpaid debt. In an instant, Nipsey's dreams dissolved over that debt. The truth behind his death, personal feud, jealousy, or a hidden plot, remains debated, even obscured. But whatever the answer, his death shook hip-hop and Black America. Afterward, the Baldwin Hills mansion became a legal battleground. Family, partners, friends all vied for a piece of Nipsey's estate. Debts, unclear contracts, disputed rights. Chaos turned the symbol of success into a war zone. The luxurious interiors remained, but no one could touch the paintings, replay the old tracks. Everything was locked in disputes. The house is now a silent crypt. No music, no smoke, no pounding beats from the studio. Just a heavy, suffocating air, recalling a man who wanted to change the world but couldn't escape fate's dark grip. 9. John Coltrane, a genius, lost in the gloomy red brick house of Strawberry Mansion. John Coltrane is an indelible name in jazz history. He elevated the saxophone from a sideline instrument to a voice of spirituality and introspection. His music wasn't just melodies, it was a journey into the soul, seeking answers to pain, life, and death. A love supreme, giant steps, my favorite things, each note a quiet sigh in a chaotic world. He wasn't merely an artist, he was a seeker of God through every note. But then, he fell. Coltrane's final years weren't the radiant light of a legend, but a long, dark shadow consuming a weary soul. After battling heroin addiction in the 50s, he emerged from that abyss changed, fiercer, more restless, more exhausted than ever. He moved into a red brick house in Philadelphia's Strawberry Mansion, a place no one expected a legend to choose. A poor, frigid neighborhood with peeling streets and dusty windows. For Coltrane, it was a hideout from the world's pressures, where music and pain could coexist unseen. The 3,000-square-foot house, with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, was too spacious for a man growing distant from his family. He spent nearly all his time in the soundproof basement studio, where the saxophone wailed through the night. An old wooden table held unfinished scores. A weathered upright piano's keys faded. Each piece he wrote began in calm and ended in despair. He wrote to forget the pain, but the more he wrote, the deeper he sank. In 1967, liver cancer advanced uncontrollably. He told no one. No one knew how much he hurt. Every night in that room was a battle with his body, with looming death. Some days he didn't leave his bed. Some weeks, no music rang through the house. Then, one night in mid-July 1967, he left for a New York hospital, never to return. He died days after recording his final piece. The Strawberry Mansion house remains. But inside, it's decay. Scattered scores, a silent piano, a derelict studio. His wife, Alice, tried to preserve it, but couldn't. Financial burdens left the house neglected for years. No one cleaned, no one dared demolish it. It was Coltrane's last stand, his devotion. Not until 1999 was it named a National Historic Landmark, but it was too late to see Coltrane's legacy shine. What remains is the faint breath of music, yellowed stains on walls, and an eerie chill clinging to every corner. 10. DMX, rap legend, dies in painful solitude in a desert retreat. DMX was a force who shook hip-hop in the 2000s. With his gritty, growling voice and raw, untamed lyrics, DMX wasn't just an artist. He was an emblem of pain, rage, and a hunger to defy fate. He had 5 consecutive albums top the Billboard 200, a rap feat unmatched at the time. But behind the stage lights was a dark world he never escaped. When DMX moved to a mansion in Cave Creek, Arizona, a remote desert outpost, he thought it was a new chapter. The 4,000-square-foot house had a pool, a studio, and thick adobe walls, like a bunker against life. He called it a place to find peace. But that peace wasn't healing, it was a terrifying isolation. Long nights, DMX sat alone by the pool, smoking, eyes bloodshot, staring into the black, icy water. The studio walls were plastered with faded posters, ink smudged with sweat, where he recorded demos never released because no one cared anymore. He had no close friends left. His family was fractured. Finances sank into debt, the IRS hounded him, and by 2017, the bank seized the house over unpaid loans. Yet DMX clung to it. Sometimes he'd sneak back for a few nights, smoking crack in the bathroom, shouting into the void as if reliving stage glory. In April 2021, DMX collapsed after a drug overdose. His heart stopped. Coma. A week later, on April 9th, he died at 50. The Cave Creek mansion sat empty, furniture dust-covered, graffiti scrawled on walls like unheard cries. It stands as a modern mausoleum, cold, haunting, the final testament to a lost legend who died alone, haunted by unrelenting demons. 11. James Baldwin, a genius, shunned, and a silent death in a French exile. James Baldwin was revered as one of the greatest voices on freedom, race, and sexuality. With Go Tell It on the Mountain and The Fire Next Time, he roared for a silenced generation. But behind the acclaim was a slow, quiet, haunting collapse. In 1948, he fled America, exhausted by its cold rejection. In France, he bought an old house in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, stone walls, faded red tiles, 3 bedrooms steeped in silence. There, Baldwin wrote, drank, smoked, and sank into solitude. By the late 1980s, he barely spoke to anyone. The living room held only the whistle of wind, the library filled with books, but no life. On December 1st, 1987, he died in that house from stomach cancer. No family, no farewell. After his death, the house was abandoned. Once promised for preservation, it fell into silence. The house stands as cold as its owner's life, a genius ignored when the spotlight faded. 12. Nina Simone, rebellious genius. Dies alone in a piano-less French apartment. Nina Simone was an icon of music and resistance, famed for Feeling Good, I Put a Spell on You, and her unyielding stand against injustice. She was the voice of a generation, a name that made white power tremble. But behind the glory was a shattered life. In 1970, she vanished from America like a shadow, fleeing debt, the law, herself. The next 40 years were a nomadic blur, Africa to Europe, cheap hotels to rented flats. In 2003, Nina Simone died quietly in Carry-le-Rouet, France. No one by her side, no piano, no stage lights, just the sound of waves and absolute silence. She lived on welfare and scant royalties. Her childhood home in Tryon decayed, walls rotting, windows smashed. But the piano remained, strings slack, keys yellowed, a faint echo of a fallen genius. They say at night, the wind through the broken frame still hums a stray note. 13. Louis Armstrong, the final notes in the Corona House. Louis Armstrong, with his mighty trumpet, was a jazz legend who reshaped global music. Nicknamed Satchmo, he brought jazz into millions of hearts with timeless recordings like What a Wonderful World. But behind the dazzle was a quiet tragedy. In the summer of 1971, as harsh sunlight hit the modest brick house at 34-56 107th Street, Corona, where he'd lived for nearly 3 decades, gone were the vibrant afternoons of music and laughter. The house became a prison for an ailing man, ravaged by heart and lung disease, moving by wheelchair, living in silence. In his final years, he pushed himself to perform, smoked, drank, knowing his body was failing. On the morning of July 6, 1971, after a fall in the bathroom, Satchmo's heart stopped forever. The house, filled with mementos, is now a museum, but many treasures vanished, like a past that can't be reclaimed. The iron chair in the garden, where he hummed unwritten melodies, is gone. 14. Sammy Davis Jr., the final party on the black marble floor. Sammy Davis Jr. was a legend who transformed music and fought tirelessly for black recognition in Hollywood. With a silky voice and prodigious talent, he went from a circus kid to Las Vegas's biggest star, shattering racial barriers. But at that zenith, Sammy was crumbling. His lavish Beverly Hills mansion, once host to stars like Frank Sinatra, became a shell of past grandeur. The entertainment room, with crystal chandeliers and red velvet chairs, was frozen in the 70s, but now held only suffocating silence. The house was dying, every corner drained of life. Sammy, who earned thousands a night, drowned in loneliness and crushing debt. The mansion became the ornate tomb of a fading legend. In February 1990, doctors confirmed terminal throat cancer. Unable to speak or sing, Sammy refused treatment. On May 14th, he collapsed on the cold bathroom floor, eyes wide, voiceless. 2 days later, at 10:35 a.m., he died in the master bedroom, once the site of dazzling parties. The mansion was sealed, assets seized, memories, photos, precious notes tossed away. New owners erased every trace, and now no one recognizes it as Sammy Davis Jr.'s grand stage. 15. Miles Davis, low notes on the dark wood floor. Miles Davis, jazz legend, crafted timeless music that reshaped the world. From Kind of Blue to Bitches Brew, his life was a symphony of breakthroughs and battles. But behind the monumental career were dark nights of heroin, violence, and profound loneliness. In September 1991, Miles' 3,200-square-foot Upper West Side apartment was deathly quiet, with only slants of afternoon sun on the dark wood floor. In the living room corner, a dusty Steinway piano waited for fingers that could still play. Davis sat trembling, eyes dimmed by diabetes and pneumonia, clutching an unfinished score, its final notes crossed out in red ink. He had no strength left to record. His body was at its limit. On September 25th, a mild stroke felled him in the bedroom, his face sagging. 3 days later, on September 28th, Miles Davis died in the ICU. A genius gone quietly. His apartment, birthplace of masterpieces, was sold days later. Furniture replaced, studio dismantled, every trace of Davis, scores, keepsakes, erased. The room now holds only cold light from the window, unaware it once housed a legend. 16. Ray Charles. The soul of music. Fated in a $10 million mansion, Ray Charles was an American monument, blending gospel, blues, jazz, and country. With 17 Grammys, he was the blind genius of soul, an irreplaceable cultural icon. His home always pulsed with music. But by June 2004, his 5,500-square-foot Beverly Hills mansion fell into an unnatural hush. On the icy marble floor, Ray Charles sat motionless, the familiar studio down the hall capturing his final sounds. Labored breaths, faltering heartbeats, no melodies. His liver had been failing since the 90s. He knew, but he stayed home, refusing hospitals, refusing IVs. He chose to die amid music, not in a ward. At 10:42 a.m. on June 10, 2004, Ray Charles stopped breathing. No grand funeral, no crowds. Only his sixth child stood by his coffin. A year later, the mansion was sold, design cleansed, all musical traces erased. Nothing remains but a cold, pricey White House and the hollow echo of a genius who once lived there. 17. Ike Turner, the rock king dead on a moldy mansion chair. Ike Turner was a rock and roll pioneer, creator of Rocket 88, the record credited with birthing a genre. He was half of the infamous Ike and Tina Turner duo, famed for timeless hits. But beyond the stage was a dark world. In his final years, Ike lived isolated in a dated View Park, California mansion. From 2000, the house was frozen in time, a dusty studio, moldy red carpets, worn velvet chairs where he slept, a kitchen cold and lifeless. Heavily addicted to cocaine, he burned $100,000 a month on the white powder eating away his decaying body. On December 12, 2007, at 11:47 a.m., he died on the sofa from an overdose. Cocaine levels 10 times lethal. Alone, door open, TV blaring. His body was found in crumpled pajamas beside an old album. The mansion was sealed for a year over estate disputes, then sold cheap, scrubbed of every trace. Ike Turner vanished from it like he never existed. 18. Lena Horne. The jazz queen dead in a frigid apartment. Lena Horne was a legend of jazz and film, an emblem of beauty, talent, and resilience amid racism. She shook Hollywood with stormy weather, the first black woman with a long-term major studio contract, yet lived bound by stifling rules and prejudice. In May 2010, Lena Horne was found slumped in a green velvet chair by the window of her 3,000-square-foot apartment overlooking Central Park. She was dead, alone, silent, no stroke, no agony. She simply stopped breathing. But her heart had died long before, when her daughter perished in a 1963 accident, when her husband died in 1971, when her voice was cut from Southern theaters. For nearly 40 years, she lived like a ghost, locked in a cold apartment filled with portraits of lost loved ones. She stopped performing, never left the city, never loved again. When her heart couldn't bear another memory, it closed. The apartment was sold, chandeliers removed, floors replaced, all traces erased. Its sale price is unknown, but it remains empty. No one wants to live where a soul crumbled piece by piece over decades. 19. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, died silently in a sealed mansion. Aretha Franklin was an unmatched soul icon, with 18 Grammys, over 75 million records, a voice that brought the White House to its feet. But behind the glory was a life never at peace, even to her final moments. In August 2018, the 5,000-square-foot Bloomfield Hills mansion, once a warm home, also a velvet cage in her final years, witnessed a legend's ruin. From early 2017, she discovered pancreatic cancer, but hid it, cut all contact, locked herself in a sealed room with only nurses and her weary breaths echoing. She refused treatment, refused care homes, determined to die on her old bed, where a photo of her at 30, lips red, hung. After her death, her 4 children fought over her will, assets frozen, the house abandoned for nearly 4 years. Weeds choked the porch, floors rotted, mold clung to ceilings. Sold in 2022, all interiors were gutted. The house that held a legend's final memories is now an empty vault. 20. Sidney Poitier, a lavish mansion but a life in chains. Sidney Poitier was a cinematic titan, the first black man to win a Best Actor Oscar, an icon who rose from poverty to Hollywood's heights amid rampant racism. He was hope, a dream, a standard. But the cost of being the first was always too high. In 1985, he bought a 6,000-square-foot Beverly Hills mansion, elegant, quiet, perfect in every detail. A curving pool amid palm trees, gleaming marble floors, pristine white leather chairs, everything orderly, discreet, like him. But the house wasn't warm. It was a velvet prison, where he lived quietly, alone, bearing the weight of being the only black role model for decades. In that house, Sidney guarded his legacy, never laughing too loud, never angry, never flawed. 6 children, 2 marriages, countless shoots, thousands of moments suppressing emotions to maintain his image. But in the end, he died quietly at 5:12 a.m. on January 6, 2022. No one by his side, just a painting of a lonely man, a scrawled line in an unfinished memoir. The mansion was sold swiftly after his death, furnishings replaced, his traces gone, except for a faint ceiling stain, a reminder. Sometimes, fame is just a mask no one dares remove. 21st. Tyka Nelson, Darkness in the Shadow of Family Success. Tyka Nelson, sister of legend Prince, was born into a musical dynasty. She had big dreams for her own music career, but it was always eclipsed by her brother's towering genius. Her Minneapolis home, vast and filled with memories, once held the fragile hopes of a woman seeking her own place. But over time, it became a cage of solitude and pain. The small studio, where she nurtured her dreams, now sits silent, echoing only sighs of failure. Tyka turned to drugs to escape Prince's shadow, to numb the comparisons and judgments. But the more she hid, the deeper she sank into despair. The house became a symbol of her life, a fractured existence with an endless inner war. Her mother died in agony, and Prince's death in 2016 was a fatal blow, leaving Tyka with nothing to hold on to. She lived alone in the house, shunning the spotlight, locking herself in darkness. One night in November 2024, with the house still lit, Tyka was found unconscious. Death came silently, no farewell. Years of being lost, a life unraveled, led to an inevitable end. The house was sold but remains empty, the small studio a lifeless space, a testament to dreams never realized. 22. Rico Wade, a 4,000-square-foot mansion and a lonely death amid debt, failure, and unfinished hits. Rico Wade was a legendary producer behind Outkast, TLC, and a generation of Southern hip-hop. Not just a musical genius, he was the soul of organized noise, the production crew that changed the industry. But behind the stage was a stifling life of debt and pressure. The 4,000-square-foot Atlanta mansion in a quiet enclave was where he pinned his hopes, with a private studio, hip-hop-infused decor, glass walls, leather chairs, granite tables. Once alive with music, it now held only silence. In 2020, the house was foreclosed. Wade kept producing, trying to rebound, but his health plummeted, his spirit drained. On April 12, 2024, he died in that mansion. Those close to him said years of stress triggered sudden heart failure. After his death, the studio was dismantled, graffiti walls painted over, the past erased. The house, once the heart of a movement, is now an empty shell. 23rd. Quincy Jones. Even a legend couldn't escape. Loneliness and collapse. Quincy Jones was undeniable. A legendary producer, the hand behind Michael Jackson's Thriller, dozens of Grammys, part of music's greatest milestones, a living monument. But in November 2024, shock spread as news broke of his death. In a cold night, he collapsed in the studio of his lavish Bel Air mansion where countless hits were born. Months earlier, he'd been drained by brain surgery recovery and prolonged physical decline. 3 divorces, failing health, a fractured family. The 7,500-square-foot mansion with 6 bedrooms, a pool, a private studio, and pricey decor now held a chilling stillness. After his death, the house was sold, fully renovated. Quincy's musical memories, his traces, gone. Only cold walls remain and a haunting question. Was glory enough to fill the void of all he lost? 24. Tony Todd, horror legend, dies silently in a house of shadows. Tony Todd, a veteran star of American horror, stunned Hollywood as the chilling Candyman. With a decades-long career and over 200 roles, he was an irreplaceable dark icon on screen. No one expected that on November 6, 2024, Los Angeles police would find him motionless in a chair in his eerie Gothic Hollywood Hills home. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, heavy ebony furniture, cold stone walls, dim light from stained glass. It all swallowed him in the world he once portrayed. They say he died suddenly, but it was a death years in the making, from when depression, failing health, financial ruin, and Hollywood's rejection began to close in. Once an icon, he was trapped by low-budget contracts, cold rejections, and relentless illnesses. No one knows the exact moment he died. Maybe the night before, maybe earlier, but certainly he died alone amid the shadows he brought to life. And this time, no director yelled, "Cut," to bring him back. After his death, the house was sold. Stone walls demolished, artwork discarded, furniture liquidated. No one remembers he lived there. A quiet death, but chillingly haunting. 25th, Saphir, the silent death of a forgotten legend. Saphir, born Reggie Gibson, was an underground hip-hop icon, famed for boxcar sessions and collabs with Digital Underground. A towering talent, yet he chose to live entirely apart from the spotlight and the world. That's why, when he passed, hours passed before anyone noticed. On November 19, 2024, his small Oakland home was silent. Saphir died slumped at his desk, unnoticed. A dark room lit only by a faint studio bulb where he recorded his final tracks. He spent his last years in poverty, battling countless chronic illnesses he couldn't name, no money for treatment, no one by his side. Even in death, no official cause was confirmed, just a cold, nameless, bitter end. The house remains unsold, untouched, his traces intact. The 2,500-square-foot home with cold brick walls and worn wood floors is frozen as he left it. His hand-drawn graffiti, a dusty mic, unfinished recordings scattered about. You've just witnessed mansions that were once symbols of success, now mere relics of shattered dreams. What lies behind the spotlight? Loneliness, pressure, wounds that never heal. If these stories make you rethink the dark side of fame, drop a comment below. Which house struck you the most? Is there a story that haunts you? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. There are more shocking truths and hidden corners of Hollywood's curtain waiting for you to uncover.